After you get your first ham radio, one of the first things you need to do is make your first contact using a repeater. There are ham radio repeaters all around the world that you can use to extend your range and connect with other operators in your community. Repeaters are critical for emergency communications, and they're fun to use when operating around town. So in this video, we're going to show you, step by step, how to get started talking on a repeater the easy way.
This is Ham Radio. And for any age decision. From BFR, I hear you loud and clear. No one says anything.
Hi, I'm Jim, N4BFR, the lead instructor at Ham Radio Prep. For many new hams, their very first contact with another ham is through a repeater. In this video, we'll cover all the topics you need to know to get on and talk with local hams around your city or region. That includes refresher on what a repeater does and why you want to use one. What are the numbers you need to know to access your local repeater? How to program your handheld to use a repeater. Making your first repeater contact. A little bit on repeater etiquette, and logging those repeater contacts. Let's get started with how a repeater works. In many cases, ham radio operators talk directly, radio to radio, and that's all you need. Let's say James and I take our handhelds to the park. He's on the east side, I'm on the west. We agree on a shared frequency and turn up the power to 5 watts. We're making a simplex contact. It's pretty easy for James and I to keep in touch throughout the day. If you want to know how to do that, we've got a whole video for you on the topic of simplex contacts. What if James goes off to another park 5 miles across town? The signal strength will fall off over distance, which means that we probably can't make the contact. Your signal also has to fight its way through obstructions like buildings. Without obstructions, we'd probably have no trouble talking 5 miles. If James and I were both on top of a mountain or tall building, we could easily communicate. Once you remove the obstructions, your line of sight communications can go much farther. Once you get out of the range of handhelds, there are a few options to extend your range. One would be using HF or high frequency, allowing you to make direct radio-to-radio contacts worldwide. But operating HF requires a more specialized radio and antenna. Repeaters are perfect for when you want to use a handheld like this one. It lets you communicate in the several-mile radius around your local community. You can extend your range by many miles more than just a direct radio-to-radio contact with a handheld. A repeater works like a cell phone tower. It just receives and retransmits ham radio signals instead of cell signals. Many repeater operators take pride in having backup and battery power during outages. That doesn't always happen for cell phone towers. Many repeaters have recurring chat groups that meet regularly that you can join in with, or just listen on the repeater and hear local chatter. It's not difficult to find a repeater near you. There are more than 10,000 repeaters set up across the US. There's a very good chance that one or more will be reachable with a handheld from your neighborhood. How do you find one? There are a lot of sources, but we like using repeaterbook.com. Click on a state and it opens a menu with all kinds of options. You can find a local repeater by band like 2 meters. Find one by modulation type. We're going to start with FM. Or find one by the closest freeway or in your county. Now that we've found a few repeaters near us, we need to gather the information needed to program them into our radio. In our case, we're looking at a few repeaters in DeKalb County, Georgia. We're going to suggest you look for repeaters that use the FM mode for your first repeater contact. There are lots of repeaters that use other digital modes like D-Star, DMR, and System Fusion out there. Digital has a much more advanced setup process, so using an FM repeater will help keep it simple. We chose the W4BOC Stone Mountain repeater. It's close by and line of sight between me and James. This is the one that we'll program into our radio. So, what exactly do we need to know to use this repeater? First off, we need to know the transmit frequency of the repeater. What frequency is the repeater sending out its signals on? In this case, it's 146.76 megahertz. If we tune that in on our radio, we'll be able to listen to the conversations as they happen. Next, we need to know what frequency the repeater is listening on for our signal. Listening and transmitting on the same frequency would be a mess, right? The repeater would never be able to separate the signal it's sending from the signal it's listening for. You may see this information listed in two ways. One is just a numerical listing. The W4BOC repeater listens for input on 146.16 megahertz. Usually, this gets listed as a term called offset. The radio's input frequency is shifted or offset by a small amount from its transmit frequency. In this case, the offset is listed as minus 0.600 megahertz or 600 kilohertz. Let's show the math. W4BOC transmits on 146.760 megahertz, and its offset is minus 0.6 megahertz. 146.760 minus 0.6 is 146.160 megahertz. That's exactly the frequency we said the input listened to. Here's a tip to make it easy. In most areas on a 2-meter repeater, the shift will be plus or minus 0.6 megahertz. On a 70 centimeters repeater, the standard is plus or minus 5 megahertz. Okay, now we know 2 of the 3 figures we need to program our radio. We have the transmit frequency and the offset for the receiver. Now we need the key. Why do we need a key? Well, frequencies are limited. What if my repeater in Atlanta was on the same frequency as a repeater in South Carolina? Sure, they're far apart. Let's consider the case that James is in his car somewhere between Atlanta and Greenville, South Carolina. He wants to talk on the Stone Mountain repeater, but there's a repeater on the same frequency in Greenville. So, how does he only talk on the Stone Mountain repeater? He uses this key. In this case, the key is an audio tone of some kind. For most repeaters, it's called a CTCSS tone. That stands for Continuous Tone Coded Squelch System. The repeater is listening for this tone. If it hears a signal on its input frequency without the tone, it does not pass it along to the transmitter. But once that tone is included in your transmitted signal, it's open for use. The CTCSS for the Stone Mountain repeater is 107.2. That's a figure in hertz. That makes that frequency a sub-audible tone. You might also hear it referred to as a PL tone. Same thing. Some newer repeaters use a DCS tone, which stands for Digitally Controlled Squelch. Same concept as a CTCSS. DCS just sends a little bit of digital information instead of an audio tone to unlock the repeater. Oh, and yeah, there are a few repeaters that don't use a tone. If yours doesn't, just skip that step. Transmitting a tone won't impact your use of a repeater if it's not listening for one. Let's recap the 3 figures we need to receive and transmit on a repeater. We need the repeater's transmit frequency. In our case, That's 146.760 megahertz. We need its offset, which is minus 0.6 megahertz. Finally, we need its key tone, which is a CTCSS of 107.6 hertz. Let's get that into your radio. Do you have those three figures for a repeater near you? If so, write them down or save them on your phone. You're ready to program them into your radio. On many radios, all three of those items can be entered with a few key presses. We're going to demonstrate this on two different handhelds. We'll use the Baofeng UV5R and the Yaesu FT65R. They'll have different menus, but the data will be the same. Let's start with the Baofeng, then we'll repeat the process on the Yaesu. By the way, you'll see as we go, the process will be similar if you have an Icon, Kenwood, or other model of handheld. The menu items are labeled differently, but the concepts are the same. Grab your Baofeng and power it on. Press the orange button that says VFO-MR. If you have the voice functionality on, you'll hear the radio say frequency mode. You'll know it's in frequency mode because there are no channel numbers to the right of the frequencies. The Baofeng has two frequencies that could be in use. Let's use the top or A frequency of the Baofeng for this activity. Push the blue AB button until the arrow is at the top, pointed up. Now let's go to the number pad and enter the frequency that the repeater transmits on. That's what we want to receive. That was 146.760 megahertz. So type in 146.760 into the radio. You don't need a decimal. It's expecting 6 numbers for a frequency. Add trailing zeros if you need them. If the repeater is active, you might start to hear audio from hams that are talking. If not, don't worry. Let's do the offset frequency next. We want to be sure we're transmitting on the proper frequency because we want the repeater's receiver to hear us. It's time to go into the menus. On the Baofeng, press the menu button. Use the arrow keys to find the menu option that says SFT-D. On some software versions, it's menu number 25, and you can just type 25 into the keypad. If you have the voice prompts on, the radio will say frequency direction. Press the menu button again while on the SFT-D menu to move the arrow to the bottom display. Press the up and down arrows to set the SFT-D to positive or negative depending on your repeater. For this example, we want it to be negative. In the menu, let's check and be sure the offset is correct. You'll set that in the offset menu. We'll set it for 0.600 megahertz. If you need a non-standard shift amount, set that here as well. Okay, we have our radio set with the repeater frequency and the input shift. Let's get the key tone entered. Go back into the menu and press the up and down arrows until you get to the menu that says TCTCS off. On most Baofengs, this is menu 13, and you just need to type 13 into the keypad. Press the menu button again immediately while still on menu option 13. This will move the arrow from pointing up to pointing down and will allow you to enter the key to the repeater. In this field, you can scroll through the 50 standard CTCSS tones until you find the one you need. In this case, we're looking for 107.2, or just use the keypad to type it in. When you have the correct one, press menu again. If you have the voice prompts on, you'll hear confirmed. Once you exit the menus, you should see 146.760 frequency in the top or A slot of your radio. The up arrow should be to the left of the frequency, showing it's the selected frequency. there's a minus sign at the top of the screen. That shows it will use a negative frequency offset when you transmit. Your radio's ready. Now, let's do the same settings on our Yaesu FT65R. Turn it on, and let's get programming. The star VM key toggles your radio between VFO and memory mode. Look at the left side of the display, just to the left of the frequency. If it's blank, you're in VFO mode. If you see something like 001M, you're in memory mode. Go ahead and click that VM button until the M is gone and you're in VFO mode. Now it's time to enter the frequency. We're going to put in the frequency that the repeater transmits on. That's what we want to receive. That was 146.760 MHz. So, on the number pad, type 146.760 into the radio. You don't need a decimal, it's just expecting 6 numbers for a frequency. Add trailing zeros if you need them. You might hear audio right away if the repeater's active. If not, don't worry, you'll hear some when hams jump on. Time to get the radio set up for the receive frequency, and we'll use the offset frequency to do that. Transmitting on the proper frequency is important. We want the repeater's receiver to hear us. On the Yaesu FT65R, you press the F key on the radio to get into the menus. That's the lowest button on the left-hand side. Press and hold the F key. It'll bring up a menu screen. When the menu appears, use the up and down arrows on the front keyboard to scroll the menus. We need the menu called Repeater. Scroll until it's selected, then a short press of the F key will show you the details. There are 3 options here. ARS is automatic repeater shift. It's functionality that knows the defaults for most repeaters. You can leave that on. Next, scroll down to Mode and quick click F again. Now you can scroll between 3 options. Minus rep is for a negative offset repeater. Plus rep is for a positive offset. Simplex is for no shift, like if we're on 146.52, the national simplex calling frequency. We know that this repeater has a negative offset, so leave it on minus rep and click F to lock that in. The last field is called Shift. Shift allows you to change how much the received frequency is shifted away from the transmit frequency. Typical values are 0.600 MHz for 2 meters and 5.0 MHz for 70 centimeters repeaters. Leave that on 0.600 MHz and hold F until you've exited out of the menus. You can change that value if you need a non-standard offset. We're 2/3 of the way there. The radio is set with the repeater frequency and the input shift. Let's get the key tone entered and active. It's 2 steps on the Yaesu. Long press F to get back into the menu. Find the CTCSS menu item and do a short press of F to get in the menu. Select TX and press F again. Now use your arrow keys to scroll until 107.2 appears. Short press F to lock that in. Now we need to go to the menu called SQL type or squelch type. Go into the squelch type menu and set it for T-tone. That will transmit your CTCSS tone during each transmission. You can exit out of the menus and go to the main screen. Let's look at the main screen on the Yaesu now. In addition to the frequency, you'll see the minus sign as well. You'll also see a little icon that says TTN for transmit tone above your frequency. Your radio's ready. For other radios, the buttons will change, but the process is the same. First, set the transmit frequency of the repeater in your radio. Set the offset for the repeater input. Set the CTCSS tone, which is the key for the repeater. All right, so we've moved out in the field to make our repeater contact. I'm here in one park. We got James off at another park to demonstrate how we can make a park-to-park repeater contact. Now we're going to use the same radios that we've been demonstrating with. I've got the Baofeng UV5R. He has the Yaesu FT65. So let's go ahead and make a contact.
All right, with my radio programmed and ready to go, I'm gonna try giving Jim a call through the repeater. So all I've gotta do is press the push to talk button, and I'm gonna say Jim's call sign, followed by my call sign. In4BFR, this is James KN4NEH on the 146.76 repeater. Really important note here, when I key up or when I press the push to talk button, you're gonna notice that the frequency on the radio changes. It changes by the offset frequency, so that you'll see that the frequency I'm transmitting on actually matches the input frequency on the repeater. That's a really good gut check to make sure that you're transmitting on the repeater's receive frequency and that you've programmed the offset correctly.
KN4NEH, this is N4BFR, go ahead.
Jim, it is a beautiful day in the park and you're coming through loud and clear. I'm glad to see we've got these radios programmed correctly. So how's my signal coming through for you there?
James, your signal's sounding pretty good. It's nice to talk to you today.
All right, Jim, thanks for the contact. It was great to do the test today, but we're gonna keep it short so we don't tie up too much resources on the repeater. So 73, this is KN4NEH. All right, Jim, let's say I'm out and I'm trying to make a contact on the repeater, but I don't have a partner, somebody that I can talk with. What can I do?
All right, you got a couple of things going for you. First of all, there's a lot of people listening on repeaters. So if you just go in and key up and say, hey, I'm Jim N4BFR, I'm on the 146.76 repeater and I'm monitoring, that's pretty much code for somebody to say, okay, I can tune in this to repeater and have a conversation with Jim, or you'd obviously give your own call sign. The other thing is, even by doing that, you're gonna hear the repeater either have a beep or a squelch tone or something like that. So you'll be able to tell, hey, I'm getting into that repeater.
That's a really good point that you made there. So if I'm struggling to make a contact on the repeater, one of the things I might want to know is, am I even getting to the repeater, right? So tell me a little bit more about how can I tell if my signal's getting to the repeater so that it can then repeat that signal out?
So on most repeaters, after you key up and talk, when you release, there'll be a period where the transmitter's still transmitting, but it's not receiving. So you'll hear a squelch tail or a beep or some other kind of indication that kind of lets you know, okay, the repeater transmitted and now it's stopping, so I'm done. That means you're getting into the repeater and the repeater's hearing you. If you don't hear that, you may want to relocate to someplace closer, someplace higher to allow you a better signal into the repeater, or turn up the power on your radio if you're not all the way up.
That is a really, really good tip.
So, James, have you heard of kerchunking?
Kerchunking, I can't say I have.
All right, so this is when people will key up on a repeater, not say anything, make the repeater go into transmit mode and then stop. So it kind of makes the repeater go kerchunk. You don't want to do that, and there's a couple of reasons why. Can you guess?
It's just maybe bad etiquette, maybe just causes noise for everybody.
Definitely bad etiquette, but also you gotta give your call sign when you transmit. So, you don't want to break the rules, right? Give your call sign, don't just kerchunk.
You heard it here, folks. Don't kerchunk, give your call sign. Now we're making a contact through a repeater. What is that gonna bring our range to?
That could bring your range up to 50 miles, right? Depending on how that repeater is set up, you could be covering a really wide area. Those repeaters, like the one we're using in our example for the Stone Mountain repeater, it is up 4,000 feet in the air and it's running 50 watt. I mean, we might be able to get 100 miles between 50 miles north and 50 miles south of that repeater.
Okay, that's awesome. So we go from a couple miles to now 50 miles or even more with a repeater. But let's say that I want to go all across the country, or I even want to talk from the US to Europe to Asia. Is that even possible over ham radio?
It is possible over ham radio. Now, some of that can be done via HF. Then you can start to get into advanced repeater things. Like some repeater owners will put on something called Echolink. And what Echolink is it's a repeater linking tool. So you'll be able to go in, use some touch tones and say, hey, I want to talk on this repeater, but I want to link it to a repeater in South Africa. Now, because of the internet, you can actually go in and make a local contact on your repeater, but it'll pass through the internet and come out on a repeater in South Africa.
Okay, so that's called Echolink.
That's called Echolink. If your first contact didn't work like you expected, don't worry. There are some common issues you might encounter. Let's check them off. First thing is to check the direction of the offset. What is the repeater telling you versus what do you see in your radio? In our case, the repeater has a negative offset. So we see the minus symbol shown above the frequency on the Baofeng and Yaesu radios. Some repeaters use a non-standard offset. We showed you how to change the offset settings on the Yaesu and Baofeng. If you're not using one of those, check your manual. Wrong tone. This could be two issues. First off, you might just have entered the tone in your radio incorrectly, so go back and check that first. A CTCSS will usually be 3 or 4 digits with a decimal place. It could be 107.2 like our example, or it might be somewhere between 67.0 and 254.1. The first time I used a repeater, I was so excited to join the net, I forgot to put in the CTCSS code. So check your work there too. The other issue could be you've mixed up a DCS tone with a CTCSS tone. If the repeater uses a DCS tone, it's usually shown as a 3-digit number between 023 and 754. It also gets entered in a different spot in your radio. Check your manual for where to set the DCS tone. Finally, maybe the repeater is not hearing you. There are 2 ways to fix this. First, make sure your radio is at high power. If you see an L icon on the screen of your Baofeng or Yaesu, you're in low power mode. The Yaesu also has an M for medium power. How do you change that? It's in the menus. On the Baofeng, it's the TXP setting. On the Yaesu, it's the TX-PWR. On both radios, no icon shows if it's at high power. Finally, if you don't think you're reaching the repeater, get closer or higher. Improving your range or visibility to the repeater can help you test. There are other solutions too. You want to consider amplifiers and advanced antennas if distance from the repeater is a continuing issue. Let's go back and look at some things in those quick sample contacts. There were a couple of good operating practices shown. Let's highlight them. If you're calling someone, give their call sign a couple of times. You heard James do this.
N4BFR, N4BFR. This is James KN4NEH on the 146.76 repeater.
Acknowledge their call with your own, like I did. KN4NEH, this is N4BFR, go ahead. Be sensitive to the fact that a repeater is a shared resource. Leave pauses for other traffic to come in. When you're done, make sure you're giving people some kind of indication that you're signing off the repeater so it can go back into use and other people can use it. And by the way, it never hurts to end with your call sign, so let's do that now. KN4NEH, this is N4BFR. Thanks for the contact, 73. If you're looking for a contact on a repeater, it doesn't hurt to say what repeater you're on. This is especially helpful if you're in an area with a lot of repeaters. Some people may be scanning and not looking at their displays when you call. Give them every opportunity to call you back. A couple of things you might want to avoid while using a repeater. Don't call CQ. It's not that you can't, it's just not commonly done. Putting your call sign out and saying monitoring is a good practice instead. Don't be a repeater hog. You don't have to instantly key up every time the other person finishes. Leaving a few seconds between calls lets other people get in. Don't ramble on too long. Most repeaters have a timeout timer that will limit your transmission time. We've heard them be anywhere from 90 seconds to 3 minutes. Don't make the repeater tell you when to stop talking. Some other things to remember: always give way to priority and emergency traffic. Always. Don't forget to give your call sign every 10 minutes. It's not just a good idea, it's the rules. It's a good practice to give way to scheduled events like repeater nets as well. And hang out and join into those nets. Unless it's a specialty net like MCOM training, visitors are usually welcome. If you want to keep track of the people you talk to on ham radio, using a logbook is a terrific way to do that. Let's see what that looks like using the World Radio League logbook. We'll start with a new page and enter the call sign. I know James is KN4NEH, so I'll add that first. I'll leave the RST as 5959 because we didn't exchange signal levels, but we usually get good levels from a repeater. I'm going to enter the transmit frequency of the repeater. In this case, it was 146.760. The software knows that it's a 2-meter FM frequency, so it automatically populated those fields. For power, I put in 5 watts because that's what I had my radio set to. You can adjust the date and time as needed. If location information didn't automatically populate or you want to change it, you can do that as well. If I'm logging a repeater contact, I like to put in the notes that it was via a repeater. That could help me understand later how I made a long-distance VHF contact on only 5 watts. Hit the log contact button and you should see it down in your log. If you look at the map of your contact, it'll show you the distance apart you were when you logged the contact. Let's do a quick recap of everything we covered in this video. We started with a little info on what a repeater does. From there, we told you how to find the information you need to use a repeater with your radio. We got you set up programming in the transmit and receive frequencies of the repeater. You also learned about that special audio key called a CTCSS. Once we had the radio set up, James and I went out to a park and made some contacts. That included some lessons on repeater etiquette. We even logged a contact. Working through a repeater is not difficult at all. We only showed the process with a couple of different handhelds. You'll find that many handhelds you pick up today work in much the same way. Once you have the frequency, offset, and tone, you're just moments away from using a repeater. At Ham Radio Prep, we're all about getting you licensed and operating. Visit hamradioprep.com to learn more about our popular ham radio license classes. Then stick around for our specialty courses. This video is just a small part of our Ham Radio Basics course, which helps new hams explore their licenses. If you got your license to support emergency communications, we have an MCOM 101 course. If your goal is to operate on HF, then the HF Masterclass is for you. Again, find all our courses at hamradioprep.com. 73 for now, and we hope to hear you on the air soon.